All right. Like to welcome everybody to this fireside chat between Iris Wedeking, the CEO of iDentical, and myself, Gary Goldman. I think most of you probably know who I am, founder of Global Health Network and Funds. Like to welcome you all here. I guess I'll do a little bit of a brief background for Global Health Impact Network and Fund, and then we'll let Iris give us a little background on herself. Most of you know me. I'll try to be brief, but it's usually a struggle. But again, I've been doing this, which seems like a lifetime at this point. For 35 years, I've been in the healthcare space, worn pretty much every operator hat there is to wear, from clinician as a dentist and physician to serial entrepreneur ×3. Physician informaticist for a very large 27 hospital system for 13 years, all happening simultaneously, by the way. And then that all led to about 7.5 years consulting around the country. It became quite apparent to me that all my colleagues, whether I was there assisting EHR development or go lives, or whether I was promoting one of my companies, there was a pretty consistent feeling of disenchantment across all of the clinician colleagues of mine, because they were very unhappy with electronic healthcare records when they first came out. But also, we were in the middle of this evolving digital health revolution, and it seemed like, especially about 8 years ago, that during that period of time, that a lot of the companies that were coming out and releasing solutions in the healthcare space, especially that were involved in clinical workflow, this seemed to have a lot of input from the actual clinicians that were using the technology. So the light bulb went off in my head that instead of starting company number 4, that we would work on creating an ecosystem, a network environment, which made it easy and facilitated at the time availability of clinicians, the ability to educate themselves about innovation, learn about different topics around innovation and what they actually meant and their implications for our practices, as well as giving them an opportunity to actively participate. Very hard to get to the clinician. So creating a trusted network, a trusted environment that was clinician driven, that would allow for clinicians to actively participate as investors, participating actively in the due diligence process. Who better than to pick early market disruptive solutions than the clinicians that are using them in the trenches, as well as advisors, consultants for the companies we were looking at, and then also helping those companies post-investment facilitate themselves at the different milestones, not just from a capitalization perspective, but also from a perspective of business development, scaling, commercialization, which leading to a larger, more accelerated exit. So that's what we started. And then about 7 years into it, with a successful Fund 1, all of a sudden, all my dental connections started approaching me and saying, well, how come you only did medicine? How come you're not doing dentistry? And I said, well, look, I haven't practiced in probably 27 years, but I would love to do that if I could get the right network. So all of those individuals have started to help me create Global Health Impact Dental Network and a fund for dentistry as well. And that's where we started about 9 months ago. And in the process, I was introduced to Chris, who was working on a wonderful innovation in the implantology space, which is not something that I had ever done physically as a clinician, but certainly was very involved as a patient and as a physician advisor. So Iris, tell us a little bit about you first, please.
Sure, great. Thank you, Gary. It's great to see everyone here. So brief background on myself. I have a background in entrepreneurship, business, and dental operations. Most recently, just prior to founding iDentical, I managed the operations for 3 dental implant centers that I co-owned with my husband, who is a dentist, here in the San Francisco Bay Area, where we reside. And it was through managing those dental implant centers that I got to witness firsthand the major challenges of the current paradigm of implant dentistry. And that is what led me to found iDentical. We found that there was a much needed solution in creating a less invasive, safer, and faster solution that more dentists could provide to patients, and therefore more patients could get access to care to replace failed teeth. So that's what led me to found iDentical, and I'm thrilled to be here today and excited for the discussion.
Great, thank you. So, it's interesting, again, coming to, when you approach us or we approach you, we're unique in that we are a network and a series of venture funds created, managed, and funded predominantly by health professionals. So we've been lucky enough through our hands-in platform to create a very secure environment to execute all of that we need to do along the fund side as well as the network side, which provides very important support for the companies once we do invest in them, or that we facilitate them even without an investment. So, we see a lot of clinicians who are innovators and entrepreneurs. And, having gone through that route myself, I know the struggles and the trials and the tribulations, even with all those letters after my name. And but it always kind of, I find it a real plus and warms my heart when I see innovations in which there's like co-founders of a company where one is the clinician, but the other one is the business person, especially when it comes to physicians and innovation. Dentists and innovation, usually they're a little bit better on the business side. They have a better baseline. So with that said, you've got all this experience in implantology, like a day-to-day basis at the point of care. You had centers that you created. So what was the night for saying, we're doing it this way, we could do better? Right? What started all for you?
Yeah, sure. So the original vision that I had was to create a national chain of dental implant centers. So not just 3, but we wanted to create hundreds across the U.S. With really the mission to create a more affordable and accessible access for patients to get dental implants, to really democratize access to care. And so we started with 3 in the Bay Area, and as I manage the operations for all 3 centers, I hired the doctors, the dentists, to staff our offices. And I only wanted to hire general dentists because I wanted to keep the costs lower for patients. And my husband is a general dentist. He trained at UCSF in San Francisco, but he's been placing implants now for over 20 years. And I thought, well, if he can place implants, surely I can find more general dentists like him who could staff all of our 3 implant centers. And Gary, I quickly found that that was the most pressing challenge that I faced with these centers. It really was extremely difficult to find enough general dentists who had the required skills and training to place implants. Now, but other people on this call may not realize that most dental schools today do not teach implant dentistry to the DDS students. You have to either become a specialist like an oral surgeon, or you have to invest in hundreds of hours of extra training beyond dental school to be able to place implants. And I found that that was a major barrier, as well as all the capital investment required, the risk involved, all the equipment required. I learned that there are so many barriers to entry for general dentists to place implants, and that's why I was having such a challenge in staffing our offices. And so that's when my husband and I sat down and we said, what are we going to do? Like, this is not a scalable model. What can we do differently? And that's when we came up with this idea to use 3D imaging, the latest 3D imaging technologies, to create a patient-specific dental implant that would fit precisely right back into the native socket site, and therefore, be able to be placed without any drilling or surgery required, because it basically mimics the shape of the natural tooth. And as soon as we, came up with that idea, I had the light bulb, go off, and I just said, wow, this makes perfect sense. I'm not a clinician, but I'm a business person. And I see there's this huge untapped market with literally, thousands and thousands of dentists worldwide who are not placing implants today, who could start placing implants immediately and very easily with this type of drill-free technology. So that's why I started the company.
Interesting. And it's interesting, again, being a dentist has been in practice for 27 years, knowing a little bit, just enough to be dangerous probably, about implantology, is that when you start delving into it, it's important for an audience, especially those that aren't dentists, to understand that, we have 32 teeth in our mouth, right? And they're not all the same. There are some that have one root that's conical. And the only thing that I remember from dentistry is those two teeth are the easiest to pull out. It doesn't take a lot of work. But then when you get to the most complex, some of them have not very straight, three roots of some of the molars. So, the first thing that I learned as I started to research for a bunch of companies that I was looking at in the implant space was that it's not a uniform market either, because there are certain teeth which align themselves more to the general dentist, it seems to be able to accomplish using a solution like yours. But there are others that may be more complex and may be possible, but more, but definitely more difficult to build a solution necessarily for that using the technique that you're using. So when knowing that, how do you present this to the dentist? In other words, when you're working with the general dentist, I'm sure, from a lot of different reasons, including revenue stream, I'm sure a lot of them would love to be able to offer this up to their practice, but it's also a very big patient convenience as opposed to not having to schlep to an oral surgeon or to a specialist. You'd rather have your own practitioner do it if they were capable. How did you what was that one of the first barriers that you came to, or a potential side in terms of the scalability of the model? Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So when we set out to develop this technology, we realized that the single rooted teeth, the front, the front half of your mouth, the single rooted teeth would be the easiest teeth to replace, given that the technology as a single rooted implant would be the fastest and easiest product to develop and get through the FDA process. That's where we started with single rooted teeth. But as you mentioned, you have 32 teeth, and we have, back teeth with multiple roots. So we have already started to design the solution for multi-rooted teeth, and we plan to develop that solution next so we could treat all tooth positions in the mouth. And so as far as presenting this to a dentist, most dentists realize that the current form of implant dentistry is highly complex. It involves lots of different instruments and surgical tools and drill kits and components. And even for the most proficient oral surgeons, which one of our first investors was an oral surgeon, he loved the simplicity of this system. There's a lot of different pieces and components and instruments and tools to keep track of, as well as implant inventory to invest in to be able to place implants in the practice. So the simplicity of the system, I would say, is the number one benefit to both general dentists and specialists. All you need to place our implants is to be able to take out a tooth, which every dentist in the world knows how to extract teeth. That's, you have to know how to do that to get your dental degree. Even Gary, I know you learned how to extract teeth when you were a dentist. And then all you need is to actually, order the implant itself, which is made to order for the specific patient. And then we have a simple mallet to give it a few gentle taps to place the implant. So the simplicity of the system, I would say, is the number one benefit for dentists, which allows them to treat more patients per hour and increased production per hour, which is obviously important for dentists as well.
Gotcha.
So Gary, so you've been both a dentist and a physician, and today you lead Global Health Impact Network and Funds, a global, clinician-driven fund. I'm curious, when you first heard our story, what was it that most stood out to you in the iDentical story that led you to pursue this as an investment opportunity?
When I look at something from a clinical perspective, an investment, I wear multiple hats. I'm looking at it as a clinician. I'm looking at it as a venture capitalist. I'm looking at how the company can scale. And when I see a solution that takes something that's more complex, facilitates the use of that technique, as well as the ability for a clinician to practice that technique by leveraging technology, I'm very interested in that. Another important part of the democratization is the social impact. We have it in our name, right? So when we look at solutions, we're always looking at companies that developing devices, developing software platforms that could promote easier access for not just domestically, but globally. And that's what I really loved about iDentical, because that's the first thing that I saw is, oh my God, now the concept of having, there are plenty of DSOs around the United States, right? And in other environments where it's more of a DSO kind of practice environment, why shouldn't the clinicians in those environments be able to do this? And then, of course, you have access to the experts for the more complex ones that we mentioned in that environment as well, and they can collaborate. So that was one of the biggest attractions to me.
Great, thanks.
Okay, now, so iDentical, it eliminates drilling and it uses the scan of a patient's extracted tooth to design customized implant, which is a cool concept in itself. But what are some of the pain points in traditional implant surgery that this innovation solves, outside of what we've already talked about? What are the real pluses for clinicians and the patients?
Sure. So it really boils down to three things for both patients and dentists. The key pain points today are really risk, time, and expense for both patients and dentists. And I'll quickly touch on those three for both patients and dentists. So for the patient, it's probably quite obvious there's drilling involved with implant dentistry today. So that involves risk of potential nerve damage or complications. Not to mention, it instills tremendous fear and anxiety. Now, having worked in these dental implant centers for several years and being married to a dentist for over 20, I know that most patients have a lot of fear and anxiety around going to the dentist to begin with. And then implant dentistry induces even more fear and anxiety for patients. So that's a real barrier for many patients to get this procedure done today. So there's risk, there's time. So it takes patients, it can be up to 7 to 10 months or even 12 months to go from extraction to final crown for a patient today with the current paradigm of implant dentistry. So it's a very lengthy process for patients to get their final tooth. And then finally, expense. So you talked about this in terms of democratization. Because most implants are placed by specialists today in the US, that really drives up the cost for patients. And as many people on the call probably know, dental insurance doesn't typically have great coverage for implants. We call it a dental coupon here. So dental implants are typically paid for out of pocket, which makes it extremely challenging for many patients to afford dental implants, given the current paradigm of implant dentistry with specialists providing most of the implants. So those are the three key challenges for patients. For dentists, it's similar: risk, time, and expense. So for a dentist, the drilling procedure does involve risk. As a clinician, they have to make sure they drill with the correct diameter, the right depth. There are surgical guides, other tools that are available today, but that's also more instruments and tools to acquire, to get trained on, to maintain, replace, etc. So there is risk of error or misplacement when you're drilling. There's also time required. We talked about the training required to learn how to place implants properly, and also time in the chair, right? So a more extensive surgery requires more time to actually provide the procedure. And then finally, expense. So as I mentioned before, there's capital investment required for the dentist to acquire all the proper drilling tools, implant motors, surgical instruments, and implant inventory. And again, having lived this, myself, I know how much it costs to acquire all those instruments and inventory, and that's another huge pain point. So the beauty of iDentical is we eliminate all of those barriers, right? It's a much safer, less invasive, faster, and more affordable procedure for both dentists to provide and for patients to receive.
Have you also, what experience have you had? Because, when you look at a procedure like this too, and just from personal experience and family members and friends, because it's a prolonged process, there's also a higher incidence of infection that can affect an implant, tension based on, the presence or absence of the appropriate bone support system by a patient. Are you finding that with your technique that the infections or difficulties are reduced using your technique?
Sure. So actually, I have our VP of R&D on the call. He's been part of all of our clinical research. So I'll have David Sanderson, our VP of R&D, address that question. Oh, he can't talk. Okay.
We can.
I'll until he can get on, I'll answer it. He just has
Oh,
good experience with the patients that
I
we've treated.
just
Oh,
He's
I
on.
just was given permission to unmute.
oh, great. So welcome, David. David's our VP of R&D. He developed our product with a team of engineers and has been part of all of our clinical research to date. So I'll let David answer that question around just the absence of or any issues as far as bone and any findings we've had around reduced risk of infection.
Yeah, so our clinical experience thus far has been very successful. We conducted a pilot study in Brazil where we treated 12 patients and followed those patients out to 2 years. At 1 year, all 12 patients returned and their implants were all very successful. No incidents of any major infections. And at 2 years, 10 subjects returned. We lost 2 to follow up at the 2 year time point, and all 10 of those subjects continue to have successful outcomes on their implants. The risk of infection, a lot of that obviously depends upon the patient's oral hygiene and their practice after the implant is placed. But we haven't seen an increased incidence of infection with our implant versus what the literature tells us exists with the typical implant today.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David. I'll also add to that for those who are on the call today who maybe aren't familiar with implant structures. This is our implant here. And there's 2 components to traditional implants, the implant plus the abutment. The abutment goes on top of the implant, and that's where the crown is placed. Our implant is called a one-piece implant, so it's 3D printed with the implant and abutment as a single piece. And what we've heard from many clinicians is that implant to abutment connection can be a source of bacteria, or can be a place where bacteria can gather and can cause infection for patients. So one of the benefits that many clinicians see with our technology is with a one-piece implant, we don't have that implant to abutment connection, which we believe can reduce the risk of infection since there's no juncture within which bacteria can form. And then also there's no risk of micromotion between the implant and abutment, which can also cause implant failures. So having a one-piece implant, that structure has many benefits for patients as well. So now, Gary, I'd like to ask you a question. Global Health Impact Network is forming an SPV to lead the Series A round for iDentical. And I'm curious, what was it about our company's clinical data or traction or technology that convinced you that now is the right moment for investors to really pay attention to iDentical and to be involved in our Series A round, like Global Health Impact Network has chosen to be involved?
Great. Well, it's a good question, and it's a multifaceted answer in that the dental network and the dental fund are have been evolving over the last 8-9 months, and we've been spending a lot of time, which is our forte is on the clinical due diligence side of it. So we're doing clinical due diligence on a lot of different companies. And we really hadn't started to raise the fund yet. And we did that the first time around for the medical fund 7 years ago too, so that once we had the capital inside the fund, we made a very quick 7 or 8 investments because we had already done the due diligence and we were waiting to make those investments. But we were a young organization from a management and fund perspective. Whereas now, we have a lot more experience and a lot more opportunities to invest in companies outside of the fund itself. And one of those vehicles, as you mentioned, is a special purpose vehicle. Well, many of you probably know what it is, but just in general, a special purpose vehicle is almost like a mini fund that allows a group of people to come together, up to 99 investors, to invest in a single company on terms with the company. He's raising a round of funding, it could be that round of funding. But the advantage being is that, and this is wearing the VC hat for executive, is the cap sheet, which has a list of all the investors in your company. You don't want it to have a million names on it when you come to institutions, because it becomes very complicated from a decision-making process at the board level. So purpose vehicle aggregates all those investors into a single investment vehicle, but they act as one single investor on the cap sheet of a company. So use that for very early companies. Now you're past that, you've raised quite a bit of money already up until this point, and now you're at the point of starting to commercialize your product than the average company that we look at. But we were so impressed with the due diligence process and the potential for iDentical that we really wanted to get in an investment sooner rather than later. Now, if we had to wait for the fund, we probably would have had to wait till somewhere between the first quarter and the middle of next year, because that's when we would be ready to close and make a bunch of investments on the dental fund. Went back, put our thinking hats on and said, well, wait a second, why don't we try to do a special purpose vehicle? And the other concept is, it's a really important concept, which I learned 7 years ago, is that usually one venture capitalist or one investor turns out to be the lead investor, and that's just a title at the end of the day. But what does that mean? Well, when I first started, I thought that lead meant whoever put the most money in. Well, it turns out that's exactly the opposite of what the reality is. The reality is that the lead investor is the one who has the best ability due diligence on a company, which includes the clinical due diligence, especially for a company like this, and can bring it to the table so that the other investors that are looking at it, that may not necessarily be healthcare experts, but it is healthcare and they like to invest in companies like this, will default to lead investor, look at the lead investor's due diligence reports. The lead investor steps in and makes the investment, then the onslaught of the other investors that are standing in line waiting for the lead to make a move happens. Now, you and I had some detailed discussion, and again, you weren't a new company, and we really wanted to you have the available capital that you need to reach your next, and you really did need a lead, because many of the investors you were looking at did not fulfill those criteria. So I suggested that, well, look, we're one organization, network, fund, management company, and we have lots of different opportunities because of the nature of the way our organization is to kind of internally syndicate our investments. So I said, you know what, let's not wait for the dental fund. And the other thing is that implants tend to fall, as you mentioned, a lot of oral surgeons do it. It falls under that oral medicine category as opposed to dentistry. So it really does, it's an attractive investment even on the medical side for us. So we said, let's get the SPV up and running. And the lead is really GHIN and the SPV, because our plan is Iris and iDentical reach their milestones for the next phase of investment. That's when the fund will be in a position to step in and follow on with the investment for our organization. So yeah, it's a little bit, it's not the way we do it usually, but because this was an unusually good opportunity for us, that's why we approached it this way.
And we're thrilled to partner with you as a result. Thanks.
Let's see. So, oh yeah, here's another concept. Because we've talked about the clinical. David talked about the development. There are other parts that are necessary for a company to be successful outside of just the product, right? Especially in healthcare. Healthcare is definitely a unique vertical that requires having and knowing the right people when you're at the point of starting to commercialize your product, how to do it. And, it's everybody knows the term, what's in it for me, right? The clinicians are asking that question. The insurance companies are asking that question. The executives of the DSOs that are wanting to use those questions. So, so because of that, toughest challenges that you've reached outside of what we've already discussed from a regulatory, manufacturing perspective? How hard has it been to raise the capital? You know, it's been kind of a tough environment recently for raising capital. So, you know, what really, you know, what are the obstacles for those, you know, we have entrepreneurs and other founders on these calls, you know, what would you like to share from that perspective?
Sure, absolutely. So I would say when I first started the company, obviously the first thing I needed to do was to raise capital in order to hire the team to develop the product. And I did find early on that the med tech VCs are starting to invest at later stages, more commercial stage. And many of them, as you alluded to, have never invested in dental and aren't familiar with how to do, you know, proper due diligence for a dental company. So when I first set out to raise our seed round, I found that angel groups and high net worth individuals was really the best path for us to raise our seed round. And specifically, I found that finding clinicians who have experience in implant dentistry could be our best champions. And in fact, one of our first and largest seed investors was New Fund Venture Group. They're an angel group out of San Diego. And an oral surgeon was a member and is a member of that group. And that oral surgeon, as soon as he heard our story, he immediately resonated with it and loved the technology and the benefits that it would provide to him personally as a very seasoned oral surgeon. So he led the round or the investment for a new fund to invest, and that led to other angel groups and other high net worth individuals, including many dentists, to invest in our seed round. So I found that the best way to overcome that initial obstacle was really to find a champion who can provide great credibility and validation for the technology and for the company. And that led to us raising now close to 9 million over the past 5 years to get to where we are today. So I'd say, you know, for any founder, you know, fundraising is typically a challenge, but we've been successfully, you know, able to overcome that through talking with, you know, angel groups and individuals who understand the value of what we're doing. And now with this SPV that we formed with GHIN, we found that that's really attracted some larger investors to take a look at this, given the kind of strategic value that GHIN brings to the round.
Great, yeah. I think, you know, another valuable, you know, point from the GHIN, GHIF perspective is also, you know, it's funny, when I first started this, I knew very little about venture capital because my previous companies had never raised any venture capital. It was all from clinicians, you know, predominantly. And when I decided to create the network and the fund, it was very important because it gave the clinicians the opportunity to invest. My mentor was the president of Maxtor at the time. And the first thing he said to me was, he said, so the first decision you have to make when you're starting a venture fund is, do you want to be a venture capitalist or a vulture capitalist? And I laughed and I said, well, what does that mean? And he said to me, well, do you want to just throw money at the companies and then just give them a hard time until they succeed? Or do you want to actually provide resources to help them succeed? Especially with the idea that you're creating, which is a, you know, a global network of clinicians and health professionals and CEOs. So in the healthcare space. So I said, well, it's quite obvious that's what I wanted to do. So we've really spent the last 7.5 years creating that on the side. So when we do work with companies like yours, you know, once we put the money in, that's when we really go to work. Because we step in and we're on the board and we're working with you closely every step of the way, every milestone. You know, anyone who, you know, wants to start a company, you look at milestones that you have to raise capital for to achieve, but then you have to execute. It doesn't just happen because you have money. So we provide all those resources for companies and CEOs like Iris at every step of the way. We even bring in other investors from our network to invest alongside of us at the later stages and rounds. And then I think the most important and probably one of the most difficult things is the international commercialization. And this clearly has those implications. So when you look at, you know, scaling this company, you know, it's an implant, right? And an implant in a Brazilian or an implant in a European is no different than an implant in someone in North America. So from your perspective, when you're thinking about it at this stage, how difficult do you think it'll be to start to commercialize this internationally, realizing it here in North America?
Sure. So as many folks on this call may know, that DSOs are really taking over the U.S. market in many ways, or they're increasing in size and numbers. So dental support organizations, or some people call them dental chains, like Aspen Dental and Pacific Dental, are really growing in size and number, and the market is really consolidating. And we're hearing that this is also happening globally in other parts of the world as well. So that consolidation, we believe, will really help us to scale efficiently and market both in the U.S. and globally. And the global markets, we're already starting to develop some key partners. There are key opinion leaders and manufacturing partners that we're talking with in other markets. Primarily Europe will probably be the next market that we tackle, and then Latin America, and then Asia Pacific. The beauty of our technology is that with 3D printing, we can easily scale to other markets. So we can find 3D printing manufacturing partners really anywhere in the world now who can easily manufacture our implants. And then it will be a matter of just finding the key opinion leaders and distributor partners in other parts of the world that can help us to reach the clinicians in other parts of the world. And I will say that even though we're doing zero marketing right now, so because we're not quite commercial stage, we're already seeing inquiries from both dentists and patients from around the world. And I'm talking about, 27 some odd countries based on my latest count. So patients and clinicians around the world are hearing about us, are finding us online, and are asking us, when is your technology going to be available in our market? So we really believe that by the time we do get to market, there will be a lot of pent-up demand in both the US and other markets for this technology. And we have a lot of fantastic dental industry veterans and people with deep commercial experience in this space who are poised to advise us on our commercial strategy and help us to execute that once we get to market. So we're very excited for the path ahead. So Gary, I wanted to ask you, dental innovation, as you know, and some folks on this call know, is undergoing major transformation. So digital workflows, 3D printing, precision surgery is all becoming more and more prevalent in this industry. So how do you evaluate companies at this intersection, and where does iDentical, in your mind, outperform in this field?
Well, I think, I mean, that's again, a multifaceted answer to that question. But, for us, I think the most important where you have to start is the due diligence process. You have to have access to clinicians that are expertise, innovators that are in this space from a technology standpoint, the 3D printing, all of that. We have to be able to kind of collate a group of individuals to come together and look at those technologies first and foremost. Then, of course, we look at, and here, of course, there is a clinician who was one of the co-founders, your hubby, and then you with a huge amount of experience in implantology, which is what this is focused in on, having run centers. So really, the check boxes were very easy to. And then when you look at, we tend to also like to focus on topics that are hot topics that really are getting a lot of attention, so that the market, both sides of the market, the clinicians, the patients, as well as the enterprises, are well versed in the topic, and there's a reasonable addressable market, right? Because when you're a venture capitalist and you're looking to invest in a company, a 1x isn't going to do it. It's not going to really, get you what you're looking for your investors and for your future funds. So this really had a total addressable market that was reasonable in size, very reasonable in size, but also the expandability of that market too, as we discussed, into the more complex of implantology are also possible with this. That was the most attractive at every level for us. Yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, does that kind of answer your question, I guess?
Sure, sure. I mean, I think as many people know, digital dentistry and digital innovation is becoming more and more apparent and prevalent in dentistry. And I think what we really sought to achieve is to bring that to implants, right? The drill and screw approach, some people say, is in the dark ages. That's a very kind of archaic approach to implant dentistry. And we're seeing in other parts of the body, we're seeing patient-specific 3D printed, implantable devices in other parts of the body. And so we're just excited to bring that digital technology and digital 3D imaging and 3D printing to implant dentistry. And it's nice to see that you recognize the value in that and the really huge market potential that we're able to tap into with this technology.
Yeah, and I think also where we're going just in general with again, the evolving digital health revolution. If I've learned anything in the last 12 months as I put a real focus on dentistry, that because of technology and the slope of the curve that it's increasing, the level of knowledge in the healthcare space is doubling every 78 days. So at least the number that's quoted now, our ability to care for patients at the point of care is becoming much, much easier of all of the digital tech. So when I look at the dental environment is much more than just dentistry, and it will be even more important moving forward. I'm a firm believer that the dental office, the DSOs, are going to start the first mile of care in general for many patients. When you're in a dental chair, first of all, a lot of biomarkers are collected with salivary samples, genomics, your DNA, which is going to play an increasingly more important role in your care over time, every patient's care over time. Does the sample come from? The saliva. When it comes to blood pressure, heart rate, screening of patients, you're kind of a hostage audience when you're in the dental chair, and you go to the dentist way more often than probably any other practitioner that you normally see. At least certainly in countries like the U.S. and Europe and many of those kind of places. So I think that the dental chair becomes much more important. And I'm very excited about that because it's causing, instead of a divergence, it's causing a convergence of care for the patients. And I think at the end of the day, everyone will benefit from it, because the data that will be collected at the level of your visit to the dentist will then be able to be processed. I'm not a big fan of the artificial intelligence word, but I'll use machine learning. And if it can be processed through a platform, an idea based on the information that was collected at your dentist, what your full body systemic phenotypic presentation of disease is, we can then direct patients, make them more aware much earlier on, treat them more preventatively, earlier diagnosis, earlier intervention. So I'm very excited about dentistry from that perspective as well. So anything that shines more attention on the technology, like a company like yours, to me, I think is very important at this juncture in time because of that transition that's happening.
Absolutely. Well, and our hope is that with a drill-free solution, more patients will be coming to the dentist, right? Because it's a less invasive, more approachable or more attractive solution for patients. So patients who might not otherwise come to the dentist might be more motivated to get a tooth replaced because the drill-free solution is there, and then they can then get access to all the other diagnostics and testing that you just mentioned. So I know we might have some questions from the audience. Do you want to conclude with our last question, Gary?
Yeah, so so the partnership between iDentical and GHIN, I believe, is very strategically valuable. Where do you think the greatest synergy is in terms of market access, clinical validation, scalability? I mean, work together to really make this a success for you, for us, and for our investors.
So I think there's huge synergies. Obviously, that's why we chose to partner with you. I think having a network of dentists and clinicians that are part of GHIN will be hugely valuable to iDentical, both at this clinical stage and as we prepare for commercialization. And then once we actually get to market, we know that having key opinion leaders and clinicians who understand our technology and can serve as ambassadors for us and serve as our first early adopters will be hugely valuable. And then, of course, pre-commercialization, providing feedback and support as we prepare for that market launch will be also hugely valuable. So that's why we're very excited for as we embark on this partnership.
Great. So reach out. So do we have any questions from the audience team?
Hello, is it me? Oh no, scary. Yeah, I wanted to know about dental insurance for you because you had that brilliant insight that general dentists aren't doing the extra track that costs a lot of money and time to become implant specialists, right? And I'm wondering with your system, how is that going to change their insurance costs?
So as far as malpractice insurance?
Do all of the above, going from the skill set they have and know and love to adding this type of implants. And it's, I don't expect you to really know, but I thought you'd have some ideas.
Sure. I haven't investigated the malpractice insurance piece or, the business insurance side of things. I will say that obviously not having to drill significantly reduces the risk for the dentist. So whether it shows up in insurance premiums for the dentist or not, as far as their, malpractice insurance goes, their overall risk as a clinician, I think should be much less with iDentical simply because they're not drilling into the patient. So
Yeah.
a risk of causing nerve damage, which is, the ultimate kind of probably most serious risk with drilling, will be, largely removed from the equation. So it's just a much safer, lower risk procedure, more predictable procedure for the dentist to perform.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I had a question.
Sure.
Hi, how are you?
Good to see
Great
you.
presentation. Good to see you, Iris. It's been a while.
Yes.
The recently I spoke to you was about edentulous spaces as well as implantologist by trade of about 20 years. Vast majority of cases that we see are usually edentulous or posterior teeth. And in that three-rooted scenario, have you guys come up with an idea on how to address the edentulous space without drilling and address the three-rooted scenarios? Because most anterior cases have a thin buccal bone. If the extraction is imperfect and you lose that buccal bone, that's like a catastrophe for us. So then you have to wait for bone grafting and then come back and do the implant. What is the game plan there? And then I'll have a follow-up question.
Sure. So first I'll touch on, so edentulous patients, unfortunately, if you've lost your tooth, months or years ago, our technology will not be a good fit for those patients. However, as you probably know, there are 20 million extractions done in the US per year, 20 million non-wisdom tooth adult extractions done in the US per year, and only 5 million implants are placed in the US per year. So there's a huge untapped market just with fresh extraction cases alone. Now, as far as the anterior cases with the thin buccal bone, one of the innovation pipeline projects we plan to pursue in the next couple of years with a portion of the Series A proceeds is to pursue simultaneous bone grafting with our implant technology, which we believe is fully possible. We'll need to further develop that indication for use to get that indication for use fully approved, but we do plan to pursue simultaneous bone grafting for those cases with thin buccal walls. And then for the posterior cases, we have already filed a patent for our multi-rooted implant for the posterior teeth. And once again, we will be pursuing that project with the portion of the proceeds from the Series A fundraise. So multi-root implants and simultaneous bone grafting are the next two big projects. So you're spot on. Those are the next two indications for use that we plan to pursue, and they believe both are fully possible with the current technology as a foundation for us to develop those additional indications. So thanks
That
for
would be a tremendous advancement. Now, when you discuss the intersection between the root form and the restoration, the abutment that goes on top of it, there's usually a gap there, and bacteria grow and deposit toxins, and that causes bone loss. So having a one spot implant, that would be a great advancement, but the issue becomes angulation. The reason we have that interface is mostly so we can correct angulation issues. That's another thing to be addressed, because if you're tapping the implant, and most people don't like to be hammered on, if you're tapping that implant in, there's a tool called the magnetic mallet out of Italy. It's very unique that would go very well with your system.
You know, this is a little bit too technical for this particular talk.
Oh, okay. Just asking those questions. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm happy to follow up with you separately.
Yeah,
Kiara. I like, yeah.
Yeah. There are some other questions as well. Tom?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tom Vogelsong, and full disclosure, I'm an early investor in iDentical and been very happy with the investment, with the team, with the application, and also done a couple other investments in parallel with Gary. So glad to be part of this. Our group is actually looking at investing a second time. I'm looking at investing a second time myself. But my question here to follow up on the infection side is I've seen a number of startups in the orthopedic space. They're adding coatings to reduce infections with titanium implants for other body parts. And have you looked at that to kind of reduce the infection risk on some of these? Maybe you or David would answer that.
Sure, David, I'll let you answer that. Thanks.
Okay, you're giving me the hard ones. The infection rate for our implants. So there is a big difference between orthopedic implants, joint replacement, and dental implants, and that is that the oral cavity is incredibly good at fighting infection. And, you know, if you go into an orthopedic surgery, the sterilization requirements are, I mean, the surgeons are in bunny suits. In a dental implant case, you know, there is a sterile area, but it's not nearly to those same level of sterility standards because of the fact that the oral cavity is incredibly resistant to fighting infections. Using standard practices for dental implant in terms of prescribing antibiotics and ensuring that the site is flushed with sterile saline. We haven't seen any cases of infections yet. I do know that there are a lot of coatings that are placed on dental implants, and if in the future we do start to see trends, that might be an opportunity that we would pursue. But so far, a bare titanium implant, if it is delivered sterile, it is it's highly osteoconductive, and preventing any contamination at the implant site during the procedure should be very beneficial. It should not increase the level of infections that we would see in any other implant case.
Great. Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Carly, you have a question.
Oh, yes. Hi, Iris. Great to see you again. For the rest of the audience, thank you for hosting this event. And I am an early investor into iDentical and happy to see the progress. A couple of questions just at the very high level. What are some of the key milestones, critical key milestones you have to hit before it's ready for the US market? And then what about your thoughts around exit strategy, whether that has changed at all since the beginning?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best to answer quickly. I know we're close to the top of the hour, but nice to see you, Carly. So the key milestones we need to hit in the next few years, which we will hit with the Series A financing round, is to complete our pivotal clinical study. So we need to treat 128 subjects to get our pivotal clinical study completed and through the FDA process. With that data, we expect to get FDA 510(k) clearance, and then we will be able to launch in the US market. And we expect to hit those milestones and launch in the market by 2028. As far as exit strategy, we do believe that once we get FDA clearance, there will be acquisition offers from the implant strategics and dental strategics. This is a very competitive and highly undifferentiated market today, with everyone basically selling the same round titanium as screws for implants. So we're already getting some inbound interest from those strategics and expect that there will be an exit opportunity after we get FDA clearance. We can choose to either take one of those offers if it makes sense for our shareholders, or raise a 15 million Series B, launch and market, show strong adoption, hit cash flow positive by our second full year in market, and then we expect we'll be able to exit for an even higher valuation at that time point. So those are the two key first time points of a potential exit.
Great, thank you for the summary.
Sure, absolutely. Happy to chat more if you'd like.
Great. Right, well, we're at the top of the hour now. I'd like to, Iris, thank you. This was wonderful, informative. Just so everyone knows, from the SPV perspective, there is a due diligence community thread created in Global Health Impact Network. There's additional information about the company and about the investment opportunity. Anyone who's interested in participating in the SPV can easily join our network, and I believe there's information in a couple of different places about how to do that. And then anyone that's interested also, you know, for larger checks at the level of iDentical, please, you know, reach out to Iris and her team. Really look forward to continuing process, getting the SPV you know, up and running and off the ground. We're encouraging everyone to kind of make a decision by November 30th in terms of your interest level, because there is a timeline on this. And yeah, I would like to thank everybody for attending these events that we put on. And we do them frequently, and there's a lot more to offer at the level of Global Health Impact Network and the upcoming funds that we have in place. Iris, anything that you'd like to say?
No, that's all. Thank you so much, Gary, and to everyone for joining. And we look forward to being in touch with everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Gary.
Sure.